My little sister Anna was kidnapped when I was 8 years old, 22 years ago. We lived in Leavenworth, Washington, a town nestled tightly inside a valley of the Cascade Mountains. A ghost town at one point. There's been an abundance of folklore about this place for centuries, dating back before the frontier of the Oregon Trail, or Wild West, to the Watachi tribe. Witchcraft, spirits, phantoms, even mystical beasts that roam the forests, an amalgam of apex predators, the head of a wolf, legs of a cougar, claws of a bear, and eyes of the owl, as one was described in a book I read once, which only emerges once every 200 years, enveloped in a thick red fog, and afterwards all of the children disappear within and are never seen again. Anna was 6 when she went missing. Before that, we were best friends. We would spend most of our time together, especially at Icicle Creek, about half an hour hike, where we'd escape to solace from the clutches of drunken rage and watch the massive salmon travel upstream amidst the babbling of rapids, as Anna gently rested her head against my shoulder. A momentary lapse of a child's much-needed solitude. We had an especially strong bond because we were rejected by the kids at school. We were both covered in scars, cigarette burns and lash burns from a leather belt. So much so that we were forced to wear long sleeves, even in the summer, to avoid being called freaks, or the most common moniker we received at the time, the Addams family. Before she disappeared permanently, Anna had begun running away. I'd wake up in the morning to see my dad carrying her under his arms from the woods, covered in mud, her tiny limbs dangling and swinging, and then he'd call me to the living room and force me to watch as he tightly looped his belt in his hand. I still have nightmares about the squealing. I dream that I'm in the forest, inside of a thick fog, and there's that persistent high-pitched screaming, punctuated with the sound of a whip cracking the skin. But I don't know which direction to run in to save her, and whichever direction I try to in this particular dream only takes me further away. And I always awaken the moment she cries out my name, Feather. My name is Heather, but Anna couldn't pronounce it correctly, so she simply resorted to Feather. And hearing that name audibly register from her lips in the midst of staunch desperation and searing agony only makes it more personal and tragic for me. I have these nightmares often, to this day. I don't know how exactly what happened to her, but I know my dad did something to do with it. The very day she disappeared, I can recall watching my mother at the kitchen table, a litre of vodka and an ashtray with a mountain on it at her fingertips, chain smoking while my dad walked about the house with his tool belt on, clutching a beer and cheerily humming the theme song for the old TV show, Father Knows Best, ironically enough. The police came by several times over the next month or so, but nothing transpired. She was reported missing and the case went cold, and has been so since 1989. I left home at 17 with my then 23-year-old boyfriend, and we ran away to Chicago, where we lived for years as he would make money renovating apartment buildings and businesses. We broke up eventually, but we had a daughter named Olivia, who was the spitting image of Anna. I didn't squander a single second with her. If anything, I spoiled the hell out of her, out of some compulsion to fulfill some part of me that had left with Anna. But just last week, I went back to Leavenworth. I'd had a death in the family, my Uncle Ricky, in Arcadia, California. This would likely be the last time I'd ever travelled to the West Coast, so I brought Olivia, and from the funeral, I decided to take her along a scenic route up the West Coast and into the Cascade Mountains to my old house and to Icicle Creek. Our street was left just as it was decades ago, and my old house was still standing, sliding and roof all redone, an addition added, and the garage expanded. Part of me wished I'd have found a pile of cinder and ash, that is, until I noticed 2 little girls chasing each other around the house, and a young man in a hat getting out of a Ford Expedition, cradling a baby. And I could physically feel my heart warming. I pulled up to the side of the house and verbally greeted the man and wife, exiting the car as well. They were a remarkably friendly Native American couple, and at my utterance of their house being my childhood home, noticing my daughter in the car seat in the back and flashing her a warm smile, we were invited in, which at first I politely declined, a reaction of common courtesy, but at the man's insistence, I got Olivia and we went inside. I averted the stories of abuse and passively explained that my dad died of lung cancer a few years back, but that we were never close, and proceeded to segue into stories of Anna and I, how we spent all of our time together, the majority of it hiking and spending time at Icicle Creek, and then finally, I brought up a disappearance. The vibe I was getting while thoughtfully reminiscing about Anna produced almost the opposite reaction than the misty, empathetic head nods and affirmations I was accustomed to from others. The husband, Charles, had been very subtly shooting his wife, Maya, furrowed-browed looks of confusion, a reaction she reciprocated in between giving the kids menial demands to stop running and finishing their lunch. When I began to explain the disappearance and the case going cold, my sentence was halted by Charles. Wait. I apologise to cut you off, but you said a second ago she was running away before then. Yeah, I replied. Why? And she would run away to Icicle Creek. Yes, where it always would go. Maya gasped, eyes wide, glaring at Charles, and his sudden reluctance to continue followed with silence from all of us, except the kids. What's that look for? I asked, nervously giggling in anticipation of what was said to me next, a juggernaut of a comment. You never... He halted once again, looking to be attempting to repeatedly compose himself, looking to Maya, before looking back over to me. Something so monumental I can't even articulate it, nor can I remember exactly what it was he said. All I know was that within 10 minutes, I'd practically peeled out in my car, speeding down the street, admittedly haphazardly making a few illegal right-hand turns, to St. John's Hospital, which has been in the same place all my life. Like riding a bike again after 22 years, I seem to have instinctively memorised the directions from all of the times we would drive there in Dad's car to pick Mum up after nervous breakdowns or recuperation after prolonged episodes of severe depression. A mental hospital on the border of Leavenworth and Juneau. We parked and took Olivia by the hand, pulling her along, my heart practically pounding out of my throat, nerves frayed, entangled into decades of hopelessness, longing and tears, all compacted into this one day, this one moment. I speedily approached the admissions window and couldn't believe my ears when the words from my mouth audibly registered, concealing me inside a reality I couldn't fully grasp or compute. "Can I help you?" the intake nurse asked, and then the words which I'd never thought I would ever speak again materialised, excavating dream and attaching to a reality. "I'm here to see Anna Fredrickson." My expression devolved into puppy dog eyes, awaiting scraps from the dinner table. "Do you have an appointment?" It was real. She was real. All I could get out was, "Is there an Anna Fredrickson here? Anna Fredrickson? And you are?" I nearly cut her off. "Her sister. I'm her sister." Hyperventilation. "ID, please," the nurse insisted, which had already been pulling out of my wallet, her hand out, facial expression of empathy, understanding the somber catharsis in this moment. She knew exactly what the situation was. I was asked to please sit and wait, which I did, shaking, sweating, and Olivia, and a spitting image of the last time I saw her, seated in between my legs, fiddling with her coat zipper. I kept repeating two words Charles said to me at the mentioning of Anna's name. Wolf Girl. Heather Miller? I looked up, wiping the sweat from my brow to see a Native American man in a white lab coat reaching down to his knees, wearing glasses, black hair combed to the side, and a very gentle disposition on expression. "That's me," I replied, standing up immediately. The doctor led me down a long hospital corridor to an office with Legos on the floor, and containers of Play-Doh, smiling warmly at Olivia and telling her, "Have fun while I talk to you, Mommy, okay?" "Okay," she responded with her usual cheeky grin, before shuffling off to the other side of the room. The doctor locked the door behind him and sat down across from me. "Where are you coming from?" "California. Arcadia, actually. Death in the family." "Ah, my condolences." He could see the nervous excitement and anticipation in my face. Okay. So, Anna. We conversed for a long, very long, in fact, period of time. By the end, I was sobbing loudly, face buried in my hands, as the doctor gently reached out and sympathetically began lightly rubbing my forearm. Words triggering deep emotions that I never could comprehend, I could feel. Trauma, sexual abuse, likely, left for dead. Feral, incoherent, unresponsive, mute, inarticulate, relearn, basic human interaction, violent, breakdowns, night terrors, relearn, utensils, visual, auditory, breakthrough, begin, to, speak, again, 11 years. Normally the protocol for a situation like this would be a prolonged, incremental, familial reintegration. Anna has been through so much heartache, anguish and grief, internal and, sorry to say, external trauma. I'll tell you now that she's got the mental capacity of a child, not much older than the last time you saw her. There is an extraordinarily sensitive situation, so I can't promise you a lot of time. She will need to slowly get to know you once again, and to be honest, she might not even know who you are. We've made so much progress over the last 10 or so years, and we must be delicate. Please, Doctor, all I want to do is to see my daughter. That's all. Just see her in the flesh. I'll comply and concede to any instructions you give me. Just, please, I beg you. No, you don't have to beg, the doctor laughed, bringing a much-needed split second of levity to all of this. She will be mildly sedated, and there'll be a nurse in the room. I cut him off. Doctor, I just want to see her. Okay, Heather. The next 10 minutes felt like millennia. I've never felt so nervous, and I was shaking like a twig in a storm. My hands clasped between my knees so tightly I could feel the sweat rolling down my wrist in drips. Then, finally, the doctor opened the door. Heather, this way, please. My heart was racing, and my veins pulsating. Blood pressure so high I thought I'd pass out before getting there. I was led down a short corridor, coming to a room at the end of the hall to the left. Door opened, and a husky male nurse standing authoritatively against the white padded door. I stopped before reaching it. I had to breathe. Take your time, the doctor said. I glanced up at the nurse, flashing me an empathetic gaze, and finally, I turned the corner. In the hospital bed, sitting up, clutching a pillow in her arms the way a child hugs a teddy bear, it was Anna. Bone thin, staring at the floor, face partially obscured by above shoulder length blonde hair. Anna. As 22 years of grief smouldered and burned down to that last moment I saw her, kissing her shoulder scar and gently kissing her forehead before saying goodnight or goodbye. All of that time evaporated as if it never happened, and I saw that little girl again. Big blue eyes, tiny thin nose, and dimples on her cheeks. I got dizzy, dropped my purse to the floor, and clasped my hands over my mouth. The tears began to flow, able to break through the most fortified of dams, and I cried out, "Oh, Anna!" I fell to my knees, in total shock and mental disarray, for a period of time I can't remember, before firm hands grasped under my armpits and pulled me to my feet. Through the profuse deluge of water pouring from my eye sockets, I wiped it away to see those big puppy dog eyes fixated on mine. Hand over mouth, I slowly approached her, the The scent of flowers and pine circumventing the room, whether real or imagined. Slowly, steadily, I leaned in, lightly pulling the pillow from her arms, wrapping her in my embrace, and pulling her in, cheek to cheek. At first her grip was loose, but then a physical response to my whispering into her ear. "Anna, baby, I've missed you so much." Her arms tightened around me, and she gasped. She began shivering, the warmth of her palm fastened over the back of my neck, and then, one word I've been longing so deeply and regretfully to hear once more drew from her breath, delicate, soft, but clear as day in a whisper. I met a girl at the mall when I was 22, on Christmas break and home from school in 2005. She unfortunately lived in a bit of a run-down, crime-ridden part of town. It was a place I always knew to avoid, but at my age, full of raging hormones, like most guys, I resorted to thinking with my other head. For this girl, I'd have damn near walked across hot coals. The town was named Monongalia, resting on a hill hugging the frozen Monongahela River, and there was me, a white boy driving around the wrong side of the train tracks. While climbing a steep hill in my 2005 Grand Prix, I'd come to a red light. I don't know what's to come, I'd have just run it, but a minute or so prior, I passed a police cruiser coming down the same hill. Seeing as I was the only one around, I have a strong affirmation that I'd have been pulled over. It was freezing out, and the few people I saw on the corners were likely people with, well, agendas. I was mentally preoccupied with making a good impression on my date, which is likely why I didn't notice him approaching, until peripheral movement motivated me to turn my head and look. But he was already on my side at the yellow traffic lines. A tall, skinny black man in a grey hoodie, hood up, wearing a black beanie, with a red bandana poking up from under, tied in the front, walking with an obvious gangster limp, looking sketchy as hell. I already knew who he was affiliated with, and it wasn't the Catholic Church. But I maintained my cool when tap 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 on my window. When the fuck will this light change? I thought to myself, while simultaneously winding down my window about 2 inches. "Hey man, can you spot me a 10? "Nah, sorry man, I don't have any cash with me," I replied. He reached up and slid his fingers over the top of my window, hand practically inside in the vehicle. "Come on man, I know you've got something." And then in an instant, the light turned green, and I smashed that gas pedal, peeling out with his hands still inside my windshield. He screamed in anger, and the last words I heard was him yelling out, "You lucky you ain't get clapped." Fuck, bullet dodged. Or so I assumed. I crested the top of the hill and for about 5 minutes got hopelessly lost. These were the days before GPS, or even cell phones were a thing. I ended up turning around at dead end, wormed my way through a neighbourhood, and came back over the hill, down another road, the direction that I came. But I knew I was several streets over from before, and would be avoiding that previous gentleman. Halfway down the hill, I hit another red light. Once again, I was all alone, and again, considered running the light to avoid a replication of my previous situation. But, like clockwork, about a block ahead of me, I saw another police cruiser across the street, and I was immobilized. I began surveying the block, and to my left, noticed the closed Chinese restaurant with big red letters in a yellow rectangular sign. But, wait a minute, is that? Fuck, it was. The same Chinese restaurant from when I was coming up the street. I figured out when I noticed the jail bar styled gate over the window, which I'd been staring at on my way up. At the light, the same fucking light as before. Jesus. I put my head down, far enough to shield my face, but not so far that I couldn't make out the colour of the lights. But I also made something else. A man in a grey hoodie, speed walking toward me from my right, except now he briskly made his way toward my vehicle. I saw him signalling with his arm to someone else from across the street. Fuck. The murmuring of my heater sounding at about 12. All my senses magnified, sweat forming onto my face, heart punching my breastbone. Primal terror. To my left, 2 more men emerged from a side street, both in heavy winter coats, and one in the middle of pulling down a ski mask over his face. "What up, blood?" the man in the grey familiarly yelled at me. This was bad. "Go," I said to myself, just as one of them to the left began pulling out something out of his waist. I punched the gas, and then, music to my ears, the wailing of a siren and flashing of blue and red. I was being pulled over, and as I peered into my rearview mirror, I watched the men scatter into an alley. I explained the situation to the officer, and he kindly let me off with a warning, and also agreed to escort me to the street I was looking for at his suggestion. You know you're in a bad area when you run a light, don't get a ticket, and are told to follow a police cruiser to your destination. Once I parked in front of her house, the officer pulled up to my right side and graciously gave me directions to get out of here safely. I thanked the kind officer, and he asked me if I needed him to hang around. "I'm good, and thank you," I told him. He told me specifically to always avoid Carson Street. I picked up my girl, and after initial hugs, she asked me which way I came after telling me how nice I smelled. I don't know why I so vividly remember such a benign compliment, but maybe it simply took me out of my mental trauma I'd just been buried inside of. I told her I came up Carson, but didn't mention anything about what had happened, as she pleaded with me not to go back that way. I'll never forget what she told me next. Last month, a 70-year-old man was shot on the head on that street, driving to see his grandkids. They live right up for me, actually. His body was found inside of a dumpster in an alley, and his car in a gas station parking lot, abandoned, missing the CD player, and everything from the trunk. Nobody knows who did it. Somehow, I had a good idea. They say if you get trapped in an avalanche, the only way to know which direction is up or down is to spit and see which way it travels. Regardless, more than 90% of avalanche victims die of asphyxiation. A few years ago, I went to Colorado with a friend. On the second day, we headed to Arapahoe Basin, my favourite place, full of craggy, gritty terrain, sketchy side paths and rock shells, and trees. I'd not been out west in years, so I was having a bit of altitude sickness, not to mention trouble breathing upon arriving and doing some runs. High altitude equates to thinner air and less oxygen. A few times I had to stop midway down just to catch my breath, like an asthmatic having an attack, an illness I've always been terrified of getting or having. I hate not being able to breathe, more than most I suspect. I've also always had severe anxiety, mostly over humans' number one fear, the unknown. After a few runs, we hit another slope. This time, I decided to carve through the trees. I didn't realise I was alone. It was steeper and faster than I was used to. Imagine going 35 miles an hour through dozens and dozens of trees within a few feet of each other, contorting and carving so hard that it feels like your abs wouldn't be able to hold your torso up in a stable position. Many people die when they connect with a tree at such speed. 35 an hour isn't a joke. I was on my way down to get lunch, so imagine being hungry, extremely thirsty, physically burnt out, and with every laboured breathing, and you make a dire misstep which magnifies and compounds all three. I thrust myself to a stop and wrapped my arms around a tree, swinging around it almost 360 degrees, sweating and panting like hell. "Fuck!" I yelled out. My friend wasn't in sight. Nor was anyone else. No laughing, talking, or crunching of snow. I was lost inside of a steep, dense patch of tall pine trees. Okay, just make it to the bottom and go from there. I'm surprised my nose didn't have an icicle hanging off the tip of it. I was beginning to freeze, even in all the winter clothing. I let go of the tree and went to jump and turn and ride cautiously the remainder of the way. But when I tried, I didn't go up into the air. Instead, I went down, below the surface. It virtually impossible for one to remove their snowboard or skis in a moment like this. And movement will only cause you to sink faster and faster, inevitably drowning inside a frosty tomb of snow. I grabbed a hold of the tree and tried to pull myself out. With all of my might, I kept trying to jump up. However, it was only causing me to sink deeper and deeper. My muscles were burning from the desperate futility of trying to hoist myself up with every bit of strength over and again. I was up to my knees in soft, powdery snow. No compaction at all, going down further like quicksand. I was panicking. Oh God, please help me. Tears were rolling down my cheeks, but would almost freeze before touching my chin. I stupidly didn't bring a mask, making the oncoming frostbite even worse. My anxiety would have broken through a thermometer. I couldn't breathe as I tried again, shifting side to side. Now I'm up to the waist, but what's worse is that part of the bottom of my snowboard pants had rolled up just a few inches, but enough to cause my ankle to actually burn from the cold. Okay, just relax, stop losing your mind and calm down. I became still and began screaming, "Help! Help!" repetitiously. Despite being immobile, I could feel myself sinking further. All I could do now was scream, wait, and think of Artax, the horse from the never-ending story, sinking to his death in quicksand in the forest of sadness, without Atreyu to help pull me out. If you go off the beaten path at a ski resort in the Rockies, you may find yourself riding atop more than 15 feet of snow, which is mostly compacted, something that most don't think about. I continued thrusting, trying to dig myself out, but only digging myself in. This wasn't working. I began frantically scooping the snow out from around me. Maybe with enough effort, I could dig myself out with my hands. But no. The harder I tried, the deeper in I went, now sideways, feet perpendicular to my head, as I kept crying out for help at the top of my lungs. I knew I would die. The resort was enormous on its own, which made getting trapped and lost outside the beaten path all the more precarious. I'm such a fucking idiot. I should have followed my friend. Woulda, shoulda, coulda, right? I begged to God, promising him this and that, asking for my life. The snow was nearing my collarbone, all within less than 10 minutes, which means that inevitably, whether try it or not, in a very short time, I'll be submerged over my head. There is no more a terrifying thing than being vulnerable and in danger in the beautiful but uncompromising primitive wilderness, away from civilization, all on your own. A little deeper now, shoulder deep, arms outstretched to the sides. I've never been so scared. It's all over. I'm going to suffocate. A quick shiver ran through my limbs. Down further, snow around my neck. I was so fucking thirsty, I began eating the snow. I could only remain immobile to prolong my life as long as I could. Nobody was coming. It takes under 20 minutes to die trapped in snow. I read it on the plane on the way here. You sink, become trapped, and die breathing in all of your exhaled carbon dioxide, resulting in CO2 poisoning. It also said to cup your mouth, which can provide you with a bubble of air that lasts up to 30 minutes, and to be sure to dig an opening or pocket for your mouth and nose to breathe once submerged. Snow was at my chin, neck freezing. I urinated my pants just for the warmth. I continued screaming until my voice was gone, and of course, before my mouth was submerged. I breathed in and cut my mouth. Time to die. I thrashed around once more, still clinging to the desperate thought that maybe, just maybe, I could climb out. But it wasn't so. And I finally went under, closing my eyes, accepting my fate. But this acceptance didn't make me more at ease. It fucking terrified me. As a little boy, I used to be horrified of swimming pools because holding my breath just felt dangerous. The idea of suffocating was my biggest fear. And now, here I am. My heart was racing. I thought I might have a heart attack. I kept my arms raised above my head so my arms were visible, just in case. Not 2 minutes later, I felt a hand grasp onto mine. "Tilt your head up and breathe," he yelled. It was a rescue worker who heard me screaming and finally saw me waving my arms. 2 men to be exact. They pulled with all of their might until I was halfway out. I couldn't speak. It's hard to after you've literally faced death, imagining what it would be like to die and truly being confronted with the possibility of worlds, universes to be specific apart. The helplessness, the slow drowning and freezing simultaneously with nobody around, nobody to hear your cries, and begging God for help with the utmost sincerity, only to feel as if he'd abandoned you, or what he doesn't even exist to begin with. The workers explained to me the correct way to dig myself out, which was pretty much the opposite of what I've been doing this whole time. I was delirious and lightheaded. They gave me a ride on the snowmobile to the bottom and had me checked by a nurse. He told me to stay in and sit next to the heater until I thaw out. When I told my friend about this, he sort of scolded me, saying, "Dude, you're lucky. There was just an avalanche there 3 days ago. That's the snow you fell into." I was angry that God abandoned me. But when I saw those EMT workers, I realised he was carrying me in the hollow of his hand. And that's that. I've been robbed at gunpoint, totaled 3 vehicles on a highway, been jumped so badly I had shattered ribs, and been attacked by a shark. All of those were exponentially less frightening than this. To all the trees out there, I'll never invade your space again.